But my heart is in photography, and I found my real love, and that is teaching photography. So now, since 2016, I've been with Saddleback College, and I now teach for the Emeritus Institute, and the price is right, right? And how many people are in the Emeritus Institute? All right, you would be in good company. So the good news, while we get my talk ready.
So this advances and this goes back.
Okay, this advances. Okay, I had to make the adjustment from Zoom. All right. So thanks again for having me. If there's any way to dim the house, you can see all the rich blacks and beautiful things. So the whole idea of this talk that you've been so kind to invite me to give is the good, the bad, and the ugly about landscape photography. So I created a talk to address all the lists you see here: crooked and wonky horizons, dull skies, and so much more. So really, there are so many ways to push your landscape photography, and the timing is really good because we're about to come on to the change of the seasons, right? Fall gives us that gorgeous light, and so a lot of the images are inspired by the season. I'm also going to talk a little bit about post-production. Then I want to end the talk with some tips that are very easy to do. So the first thing, of course, we've all seen this, right? We live by a coast, and it's very easy to have those crooked horizons. Happily, if you happen to make that mistake, there are ways out, but it is a common problem. Here's an image I shot earlier this year in Australia. This is before there are other problems. You can see pool shadows in the hills, and just by fixing it up, straightening the horizons help. And I'll show you, this was shot in Laguna Beach, and I liked it, didn't love it, but I liked the focal point, and then straightened it. But the beautiful thing now, we have really easy tools now in Photoshop to straighten it without losing the edges. It's the first thing. The other thing is boring skies, right? And we live in sunny California. This was boring. This is the actual boring image taken in Idaho. And added a beautiful sky. And this is before it was easy. And this is about 10 years ago, when I was teaching adult education, we had a project where we went out on field trips around Irvine. And the project was to put some interest in the sky, take it to black and white. One of the things I'm going to talk about, whoops, I went the other way. Okay, thank you. So the other thing I'm going to talk about is if you see a sky, it reflects in the water. So that's the other critical thing to know if you add a sky. And I really believe in keeping a sky library. And so a few days of the year, we have gorgeous skies. So in May, we went to Borrego, beautiful place with those metal sculptures. And I like this one better. Very easy. I sometimes like to have people there. There's my husband. Here he is for scale. These things are amazing. This is another typical boring sky, made a little bit more dramatic. And the temptation was to get a little bit maybe over dramatic, so I really started paying attention to those reflections. Here's one I shot last year in Slovenia, one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to, at Lake Bled. If you've ever gone, oh my gosh, it's beautiful. But it was boring. The thing about the skies, whenever you include skies, it'll grab and suck all the energy out of the shot. See how you've got that white corner and your eye just drifts out. So that was a problem. So I liked the shot, didn't love it. I wanted to love it. So this is what it became. Is that better? So the other tiny subtle thing I wanted to show you is the reflection, the very subtle reflection in the water.
You want to point things, use the top.
Oh, a top one, good, thank you. Oh, hey, what power. Oh my gosh, this is great. Yeah, I don't have to touch it. So, yeah, right there. Okay, there it is.
Just a little bit.
That's a lot easier.
Yeah.
Now I got lucky. Sometimes you get lucky, right, Rick? That sometimes you're there. Here is another thing to know about skies. The polarizer filter is a must-have. Now, it's not a filter to have on all the time, but when you want to bring out beautiful skies, it is your best friend. It does other things too. And I went the wrong way again. I didn't do much to the shot. I love to make an image where there's very little post-production. And I came from the film days, the big camera days, shooting 4x5, 8x10. So we had to get it right in the shots. I still have that feeling. So I love using filters and other tools to move the images forward. So it did make a difference, right? Is that dramatic? So polarizers are wonderful. Of course, you must be 90 degrees, right, from the sun. And this is an example of a polarized reflection. And this is before the polarizer. And so I wanted to also talk about what you can do to think about the image beyond the beauty, right? I thought this was dramatic. It was okay, but I thought this was better. And I'll be talking a little bit more about post-production. Back to the boring skies, right? I see a lot of images like this. You see how your eye drifts up. I didn't shoot this, but this was, it was an image that could have been wonderful. So we just finished a section, if you're in my classes, we were talking about tonal balance. And so I wanted just to talk about that a little bit when you're working with landscape photography, keeping that balance of the darks, the mid-tones, and keeping the eye engaged. In this last shot, your eye drifts up, right? You don't stay in it. An image that is engaging keeps you looking and keeps you balanced. Another good example of tonal balance, the darks, oops, look at my pointer, the balance down here, you've got the balance of this corner, and I'm going to show you a technique that really helps to think about tonal balance, because sometimes you're just too close to the shot. You're just too close, you kind of fall in love with it, and then you walk away and you think, oh, what's wrong with it? Let me just advance this. See, I may have lost my advancer. Okay, you may be advancing for me. Okay, oh good. So let me go back. So this is just another example of bringing the eye back in. The other thing that kills, or one of the good, bad, and uglies, is blur and camera shake, and it can be an easy fix. Rick made a great point about keeping the shutter speed in mind and the aperture in mind. I think shutter speed is critical, especially with long lens photography, and of course I'll give you the formula to never have blurry pictures. Here are awful examples of images that are throwaways, and they're just terrible. There's actually a Flickr group for blurry pictures, and they were free to use, so I didn't shoot those. But I did shoot this. So this is an example of long lens photography, and I really love backlit autumn leaves. I just love them. But there is something tricky. They're moving around in the wind, and so there's a problem with the shot. It's not super sharp, and we're going to compare it to the next shot. In fact, it was a fail. There's some problems, right? I know, you see this blurry bit. Also, there's a weird, strange line that goes through it. But Mandy, I'm glad you're here. Right, I'm back. Okay. But it was very curable. The problem was, here I have 560 millimeter, close to 600 millimeters, but the shutter speed was too slow. So I kind of peeked at it and thought this would be better. So here I'm twice as fast. I'm very close to 1 over the focal length. And that's the only equation you really have to remember, 1 over the focal length. Even with image stabilization, particularly with long lens photography, keeping it fast. This is where ISO kept a little bit faster, but it was a better result than what I had. And then, of course, made it a little bit better. I did a few things. Got rid of that weird line. So watch the edges. That's another tip. A lot of images are ruined by the edges. I think that's very distracting. And there, isn't that better? Is this a little bit cleaner? But sun motion was fun. I love the fluttering leaves. In October, we get Santa Anas, we get the breezes, the leaves are turning. So this was an intentional movement. At 1/10 of a second can be very fun for photographing landscapes. This is more of an intimate landscape, but it felt really alive. And so you can see I dragged the shutter at 1/10 of a second, stopping down, keep that ISO low. And if you really want motion, you can start using those ND filters or neutral density filters. Of course, this is intentional camera motion. I could do a whole talk on that. It is such a fun way. And if you feel like you need to freshen up your photography, try some intentional camera movement. That's a zoom burst. Again, the same technique. With the zoom lens, stop down. Even at 1/15 of a second, you get these fun results. A lot of landscapes lack because they lack a focal point. Now, sometimes an image can be afocal, like a field, but sometimes they're not as engaging, like this, right? It's kind of forgettable. And I'm sorry, I shot it. Not all of them are great, but I thought this one was better. And there's a focal point. There's this one tree that fell. So your eye has something to hang on to. Also, we love pattern. The eye just loves it, loves that pattern. We look for those things even unconsciously. And there's some pattern, yet it doesn't quite have a focal point. Like this. Beautiful focal point. Backlight and focal point combined. Again, another fall image. But so back to, and that is the poster child for a focal point. A lot of images, a lot of landscapes are forgettable. We're talking about the good, bad, and ugly when there's nothing in the foreground, right? It was beautiful when I was there, got it home, had nothing in the foreground. Another one, nothing in the foreground. Beautiful. We'll talk about time of day also. The time of the day was flat, middle of summer. Now, a little bit better. Really like having someone for scale, a pathway, a leading line, a diagonal, a little bit more interesting, even though it was a boring sky day. But a lot of landscape images break down in the processing, or they're built up. So I wanted to address one of the ugly, and this is about processing and over-processing. And it can make or break images. And Ansel Adams, who we all know, he was a perfectionist in the darkroom. And I know that who here has worked in a darkroom, actual darkroom, and made prints? Yeah, you saw the magic. You saw the prints come up. You know that it takes time and time again to get those beautiful prints. Well, in post-production, we are now responsible for so much. Now that we are also processing raw images, you're also responsible for the development of the film. And so here, there's Ansel Adams, and I'm going to be showing you this image that you probably will recognize, Moonrise over Hernandez. And he actually worked to bring out that contrast. So if Photoshop was around in Ansel Adams' time, he would have just loved it, I think. Yeah, I believe it. The time to make prints. And I relate a lot to that. But look at where it was and where it became. And also the interest, oops, we'll see that again. I went the wrong way. There we go. Let me go back. And we'll see that in a later slide, but he only had one shot. And he was delayed because he couldn't find this light meter. It's a really interesting story about the making of Moonlight over Hernandez. So I wanted just to show you the making of 40 photographs. And I think Valerie, who I saw a little while ago, told me about that book. And it's wonderful if you want to study the work of Ansel Adams. So I'm going to show you the work by a student who gave me permission to show some of her images. Mika Matsui Tran. She took this image of a landscape, photographed locally, and by processing and thinking about it, she came up with this result. And this was for a tonal balance project. And you see that your eye is more engaged. The projected image is not as beautiful as what we're seeing, but it was a big improvement. But so often we see this. So I wanted to talk a little bit about post-production. And it's kind of a mediocre picture that just got destroyed. There's a lot of temptation out there with those dials and sliders. Here's another one, right? Not good. I see a lot of them. Fortunately, seeing less of them in the classes, but it is a temptation. And resist the temptation. Like that. It's almost there. It's just a little bit too brassy. So I'm going to show you a journey image went on. Wait, it was good. There, that's better. A journey that this image took. It's kind of, whoops. Okay. There we go.
Right.
Am I okay? Can you hear me? All right. I'll hold both things. Okay. So this is an image that I was not really excited about, but I wanted to kind of play with it and see what I could bring out of it. You know, that 20 hours in the darkroom experience. And I just wanted to show you its journey. So I had some problems to solve, right? So here it's a little bit wonky, not quite straight. I really love these little sea lions. You couldn't really tell what they were. But I wanted the balance as well. It needed a lot of work, but I thought it was worth it. First thing I did was straighten the horizon line, cropped out excessive sky. I'm going to talk about how you can help make decisions on how much sky you're going to include. So resist temptation. I don't know if you can really see it, but this is an example of sliders going too extreme. And there is a fringe that results around the shape of the foreground and midground. We can't really see it in the projected image, but there is this fringe that can happen when the sliders are pushed too far. Resisting more temptation to oversaturate. It kind of destroys it, looks a little fake, right? And so here you can see the vibrance, saturation is just a little bit too bright. And always recommend, though, if you want to go into black and white, working from the color file. If you shoot in black and white, of course, in camera, it's a JPEG. Always shoot a RAW so you can go back and really tone it. I love playing with the sliders, bringing out the best in the, I'm going to try to use my pointer again, but you can see that you have this color mixer right here on either camera or Lightroom. And then The other thing I recommend is watching the clipping warning feature, right? Those are those wonderful guides that exist. I wish I had them in the darkroom times. But these are these little guides on the sides. They will warn you if your blacks are getting too weird. Like, look at this. See those right here? Those blue, that blue? It's just an indicator that the blacks are going too far. So if you want a little bit of detail in those blacks, and you can do this also in the whites. And so this is what I see a lot. Avoid this temptation. This is the extreme dehaze, which will kill a photo, rob it of its energy. And so you can see, I don't know if you can see in the slider, but it is pegged all the way, and it just looks heavy and moody. But you have the power to show a lot of emotion and power in your landscape photography. Ansel Adams said that the negative is the score. He did a lot of musical metaphors. He was a concert pianist, and he would say it's the score, but the print is how you perform it. So the same thing in Lightroom and Photoshop, that is our performance. And I think this performance is way too heavy. Too many bassoons and bass instruments. So I'm going to show you a technique that I really like. I learned this actually from Charlotte Gibbs, who's a wonderful photographer. She does intimate landscapes, but this is actually a technique we've used in art where we rotate work just to see how the composition holds up. But taking it further, rotating it and blurring it helps you step away from it. In the old days of critiques, you would kind of squint your eyes. Here you can do this in Lightroom and just blur it. So this helped me. Whoops, went the wrong way. This helped me make decisions on how much sky, how much tone, and how much sky to include. So it came a long way, I think, I hope, maybe you agree, from this, boring, to this. The power. There it goes.
You want to use a regular mic?
I might. I mean, this is cool, but I think I would. Oh, great. Oh, you can hear me. So in photography, we have many levels of redundancy, right? We have this in audio, too. So I'll continue. I wanted to leave you with some tips. So I showed you a lot of good, bad, and ugly. Now I want to show you things that went wonderfully right. So some of the things to look for, of course, would be looking for dimension and depth. Of course, time of day does matter. And try the beauty and magic of long exposure photography. I'm going to show you some examples. And looking for patterns. They're all around you. And we have an enhanced vision as photographers. We see the world very differently, don't we? And also look for details. And also surprises, juxtapositions, things that might be surprising together, and experiment. So I'm going to show you some examples. So I mentioned earlier that a lot of images suffer because they're flat and lack dimension. This had pattern, nice lighting, backlighting, but not a lot of dimension. And what I'm going to be talking about in this next image, our next example, is foreground, midground, and background. And this is an image taken a couple of autumns ago. Didn't really do too much to it. Did a little bit of work, but not much. It was just a beautiful day. But it has more dimension, right, than this one. So you're giving us that feeling of depth. And I'm going to show you some great examples. Of course, Ansel Adams, giving us that beautiful depth. This kind of wide scope image. He really liked small apertures, capturing that depth and sharp detail. So the way to get that depth is by using curves and lines, and they add such dimension and perspective. Some examples like this. We have a foreground, midground, and background. A feeling of depth. Of course, the lighting helps as well. And so the light was just perfect at that moment, right? And more depth. Foreground, midground, background. Great example, Edward Weston. A lot of patterns there, shapes, balance, not a lot of sky. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about sky. And there's that beautiful print that I've read that Ansel Adams printed about 20,000 times. Yeah. And it took a long journey, but it's just beautiful. Yeah. Gorgeous. So you see that foreground, midground, and also atmospheric perspective. That will give you that sense of depth. And when I say atmospheric perspective, we can see how you gain more contrast in the foreground, you start to lose the contrast in the background, something to keep in mind while processing. But there's balance. There's that tonal balance I was mentioning. We got the balance of the light tones with the sky, right? Does that feel balanced? And Ansel Adams, Dunes Oceano, full of shape, the triangles, the balance, and of course the leading lines, that beautiful curve that goes in, and we see that foreground, midground, and background, and drama, and I'm sure he spent a lot of time in the darkroom. Minor White is another wonderful photographer to study, one of the great photographers of the 20th century, and you can see that kind of balance I was talking about. I mentioned long exposures. There's a magic. There's so many things that can happen. In fact, if you want to get people to go away, just have that shutter stay open, right? That's a long exposure. Of course, there's also blue time. I could do a whole other talk about time of day, but here is that magic time when the sun has already gone down, but night has not fallen. It's just a beautiful time to shoot. So I'm going to show you a few more images by Mika Matsui-Tran, who was so kind to let me borrow her images for this talk. This is an example of a 25-second exposure in January. She told me she used a 10 ND filter to make this image, but it has an ethereal quality. So we see a lot of beach images, but not quite images that you would expect when you really drag the shutter. And of course, that takes a little planning. And I'm going to show you a few that she created. Here's a 4-second exposure. She achieved a real kind of misty quality that was really beautiful. And when you first learn photography and figure out the shutter speeds, it's a great exercise to try. What happens? Try photographing the waves. What happens at 1 second? What happens at 2, 4, and then keep doubling it. 16, 30. What happens at 5 minutes? It can be very exciting. Of course, that's when we need the filters. And then here is 30 seconds longer exposure. And then this is 30 seconds. I think for the last 3 images, she used a 6 ND filter. But you have that also color. There's another balance of complementary colors that just look beautiful together. This is a 10-second exposure she created in Japan. And you can see that beautiful blue time. And then there's another magical thing to think of. Cityscapes, so that's part of landscape photography, like seascapes. But if you look really carefully, you can see some wonderful diffraction here. That diffraction that happens with small apertures. She shot this at f16. Beautiful balanced exposure as well. One of the things I mentioned is this depth and pattern. This is a shot I made in Cuba. wonderful for photography and so many other reasons, but this I really enjoyed because of the balance of shapes and forms. Looking for pattern. Pattern is all around you. And this, although it's not really a landscape, we can say it's a landscape, right? It's a type of landscape. It's an interior landscape at Sherman Gardens. Just happened to be wonderful. And of course, more pattern, more intimate landscapes. But what I wanted to show you in these images just now, you don't have to have sky. Some of the strongest landscapes don't have sky as a distraction, although sky was an important component in this image, also shot at Sherman Gardens. Landscape photography can include little details. This is the importance of aperture, of course. You get that, we get the depth of field that is shallow when you open up that aperture, and can be also a real aid when you want to have a fast enough shutter speed in that wind. And this is part of the talk I gave to South County Photo Club, I think over 10 years ago. So I'm so excited. I just had to say, watching South County Photo Club grow from 2009, and this was, I had to bring back a slide from the Wayback Machine, but I thought it fit right in. So I thought, oh my gosh, but look at the beautiful difference you get by using your aperture thoughtfully and thinking about all the details. So much of photography is also attention to details. So I know when people start taking classes who are engineers, I think Rick mentioned that earlier, right, who are in engineering, the toughest thing is learning the creative aspects of photography. And also many creative people learn the technical aspects. It's a marriage of technical prowess and creative power. So I think that it's an engaging activity creatively for a lifetime. But here's another application of that narrow depth of field, wide open aperture. Really beautiful, I think. And so here's one more from fall, another long lens. Really like that. This is actually one I didn't do any processing to. It was just saying it was at least 1/500th of a second, one over the focal length. But these are intimate landscapes. These are close-up, and those can be fabulous opportunities and not needing the sky. Another example. And filled with pattern. I was looking at the direction of light. I wanted to add so much more to the talk, but don't worry, I'm almost done. But with autumn, we do have that slanting of the light. The sun is low. We get those beautiful shadows that we really don't see on days that are murky, and use those shadows. And this is more of a wide scope shot, very different from my tendency, which is more long lens photography when I shoot landscapes, but sometimes wide shots can be really exciting. Here's an example where weather played a big role. Early in the morning, you get a gift of fog, right? It really gives you that feeling of depth. And I got to show you the focal point, right? It had a focal point, and I waited. I was learning in wait. And yes, I got my focal point right there. You have to sometimes wait. Good things come to you that wait. So I mentioned experimentation. About a year ago, I took one of my older Nikon cameras, and I had the sensor altered, and now it can shoot infrared. So I wanted just to show you a little bit of the magic of infrared. So this is another thing to consider. And if you shoot infrared, you know the magic that is infrared. And it is black and white, really kind of on steroids. There's so much detail in the highlights. It was such an inspiring thing. So I started taking ordinary walks and seeing what I could do with infrared. This is one of my earliest shots, but I was amazed that this was boring. I mean, how boring is that, right? It's a nothing shot. But what can happen? The magic starts to happen, right? The different tones. But it was a bit of a learning curve, but it was worth it. This was starting learning and grabbing onto it. My studies continue. Really enjoy that approach to landscape photography. And so here I used a 720 nanometer conversion, which gives me an opportunity for a little bit of color, false color, if I want it. A lot of times I don't use it. In this case, I did some channel swapping. So here I got a little bit of the blue sky. I just thought it was surreal. And then here's another infrared, trees just come alive. And it doesn't always have to be cloudy days or bright sunny skies. You can try infrared with people. That's another talk for another time. But I just wanted to show you how you can use this approach for a very powerful effect using infrared. So experiment. Have some fun with it. I just thought it worked really well. Is that fun? Little infrared, it was already weird. Let's just make it weirder. Sometimes surprises happen. So this was a juxtaposition, or you could say a conceptual balance, right? Two different things happening, but sometimes it pushes the landscape and adds a little sense of whimsy. So that's another thing, and this was an assignment also by Mika. I just had to include this in tonight's talk. Is that great? And she did that composite, and of course we have the tools. It's not illegal to make composites, right? And she took these 3 shots. So she has a library. Oops, I went the wrong way. And created this amazing shot. So I thought I would end on Mika's amazing image. And so it is my pleasure to come here. As you know, I do teach for Saddleback College Emeritus. If you would like to join us, the price is right. We have many sections of photography. Registration begins next month in November. And so I teach in person now on Thursday afternoons, so I'd love to see you if you can join me. I'm at Laguna Woods, and I'm also online on Tuesdays. So I teach 3 classes, and I wanted to tell you, I have catalogs for you if you want at the front, and the fall catalog looks a lot like the spring 2024 catalog looks a lot like the fall catalog. We carry over a lot of the courses. And there's so much more than photography. We have art classes, right? We have so many different disciplines. We have health and wellness. I've had the pleasure of teaching for the Emeritus since 2016. And I'm now the chair of the Fine Applied and Performing Arts. It's a wonderful college. So proud to work there. We do have some courses that are in progress, although we are in our 7th week, but definitely think of us for spring. And so I wanted, if we have a moment, I don't know if we can get on this link, but a lot of photographers who have, including you, who've taken the courses and have continued to study photography, this talk is for you. I am so honored to be before you and see the beauty of your work. Every month when I see those galleries, I get so excited. And every time I go to the fair or I hear of award-winning photographers, it makes my day. It is why I'm here. And I just wanted to thank you. I don't know if we can make that link work, but it is, a lot of photographers have gone on to publish work and move on in their photography. So I think I'll end there. I am wanting to thank you again for having me, and have a continued wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Laura, thank you so much. You have a good one. Thank you. Oh my gosh, yeah. It's very worth it. Thank you, everybody. Just a quick, there we go. Thank you, Don. Yes. Quick reminder for any Sony shooters, we have a Sony get-together here on Saturday at the San Joaquin Wildlife Sanctuary in Irvine. 7:30, anybody wants to go shoot, even if you're not a Sony shooter, it's fine. Groups will certainly meet there probably. And at 9 o'clock, we're meeting just to sit down and BS about Sony. Okay? Everybody have a great time. Thanks a lot for coming.